in the midst of a huge transformation where peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Noelle Peart. She is the Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Exos. Noelle, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Absolutely. Well, first, Christina, thank you so much for having me today. Again, Noelle Peart, pronouns she, her, hers. And a little bit about me. Currently, I've been in Exos for just a little under 3 months. So super excited these first 90 days where there's so much going on in the organization. In my little history, I was at Best Buy before this for about 14 years in multiple different roles in human resources, learning and development, but super excited about the transition here at Exos because prior to my, career, right? When you think about jobs, I have a bachelor's degree in kinesiological science and a master's degree in athletic training. So coming back to work for Exos, a health human performance company, is almost like full circle for me. So gave me some great opportunity at Best Buy, but here I'm putting my background, right, like what I paid for my degree to use and putting in all that practical knowledge and being able to impact people in a different way through diversity, equity, and inclusion. In terms of what I wanted to be when I was a kid or what I thought I would be, oh my gosh, so many things. I played basketball. So at one point I wanted to be the commissioner of the NBA. Probably not very realistic, but I did. I wanted to be a chemical weapons specialist after I saw the movie The Rock. I wanted to be a judge. So it's interesting that all those spaces I'm interacting with people and I'm helping people. So it's no surprise I'm here, but definitely wasn't on the map. But I was thinking about that probably in 6 or 7.
I love it. A bunch of different dreams. And I always think it's an interesting question to ask people as well in terms of your role as a leader and all of your experience too. I would love to ask, since it's in the title of the show name too, how do you think about company culture, especially qualitative and quantitative ways to really think about measuring progress and kind of the pulse of the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. And you said it, company culture is huge. And that's one of the things that drew me to Exos, right? We say every day greatness is a team sport. And the way that we measure that is one through interactions with one another, right? So some of that's the intangibles. But from a tangible standpoint, it's the pulse surveys and how we engage and get an idea of how our teammates are feeling. It's our employee resource groups. And here I'm supporting one of them today, our multicultural BIPOC group.
Love
And
it.
in those spaces, right, with our employee resource group, they're giving us the real, they're giving us that nitty gritty. And it's an opportunity for us to kind of check in and get to understand what the culture is like. We also, of course, have diversity metrics like every other company out here. But I think what's important is not just the metric, but the story that it tells. And that's the work that I'm super excited about. Why I joined Exos is to be able to take the work to the next level and ensuring that the work is part of the culture, right? DE and I tell people it is DNA of the company. And that's what's really important, the DNA of a company.
Yeah, I definitely agree that diversity, equity, and inclusion should be at the DNA of all processes in the organization, and it's everybody's responsibility to contribute to that story of the organization as well. And I know in your role too, it's not Noelle's responsibility to make sure that Exos is, an inclusive place. It's really everybody's opportunity. But what is your kind of unique role in being kind of the leader of, diversity, equity, and inclusion? And being a culture conduit at Exos.
Yeah, and Christina, you're right. It's everyone's responsibility. My job is to help, but I think what I call steer this ship, right? To make sure that we're going in the right direction. But what I think of my role is helping our leaders to understand exactly your point is how it shows up everywhere. So there's things that in my first 90 days is literally I said, hey, I'm part of our performance review and appraisal process. Hey, when we think about revamping interview guides, sign me up. And those are the parts because sometimes people may not think, right? That's part of diversity, equity, inclusion. And it's a major part. And to me, that's why it's really important that our company is taking that stance. So weaving it into all that we do. We start conversations talking about people And DE&I is people. I tell people we don't have to start a meeting and say, we're going to talk about DE&I now,
Right.
right? Like is how we show up and all that we do when we're talking about staffing and recruiting and turnover. And that's my role, is to help leaders to see how it's in everything that we do, that tells the story, because that's what keeps our clients coming back, our athletes coming back, and ensuring that our employees have a safe place where they want to be and where they want to continue to learn and grow their careers. So 100% agree with you.
Absolutely. And also I like the examples you kind of provided too in terms of the employee experience, the interview experience of candidates as well when they first interact with you leaders and the brand of the organization as well. And it's testing things,
Yeah.
iterating on the strategy. People are dynamic. And I agree that diversity, equity, inclusion is about people as well. So really having kind of a two-way conversation always and kind of like that open door.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And that's what keeps people here, right? Like, we talk about diversity, and sometimes people think about it as two different things, right? There's diversity and equity, or there's diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's all together, and all has to blend together in order for someone to feel comfortable in the space that they are. Because otherwise, you'll have a rotating door, right? From a turnover standpoint, if you don't ask the right questions and build trust the right way. So, yeah, totally aligned.
Yeah, you want to make sure that people feel like they can do their best work in the space as well and feel comfortable with their manager and have that psychological safety as well. What is your kind of philosophy around kind of non-negotiables that organizations or companies can really implement to intentionally create that environment that has psychological safety?
Yeah, and I think first it's just starting with building trust, right? Because you can't just wake up and say, "Oh, this environment is psychologically safe." Like, it does not work like that. As much as we want to snap our fingers and make it happen, you have to build trust and get to know each other, right? There's a lot of people over the past few years that said, bring your authentic self to work, and I love that. But I have to feel comfortable bringing my authentic self to work when I trust the people that I work with, or that I work for, or that in or work for me. So when that environment of trust is built, and then I feel comfortable that I can engage in these conversations, that's how you build psychological trust. When someone knows not just my name and my title, but understands who I am as a person, right? What gets me excited, what motivates me, also what drains me when it comes to energy. Because if you know all of those things about me, I feel comfortable talking to you. You're responding in a way that excites me, right? Or it gives you the ability that you can learn from. Then we're bonding together. Then we're connecting. And that's how you start to create that environment. It's also helping them educate people, right? We talk a lot of conversations in recent years about microaggressions. When those happen, what do you do? If I'm not in a psychologically safe place, then I may not feel comfortable talking to someone about how I experience a microaggression, or letting them know that they said one to me. But that's why it's really important here at Exos. And again, our employee resource groups have done a phenomenal job in helping to lead that conversation, as they're all over the company, right? It's not just our folks in the field, they're in corporate, they're in our athlete performance institutes, and that's what's important in the work. So that's just a couple of different examples of how we create that here at Exos. And again, our leaders, Sarah Robo-Hagan, our CEO, and our president and founder, Mark Verstegen, has done a phenomenal job in creating that environment. They even have an email address. It's Ask Mark and Sarah, and they take emails that people can feel comfortable reaching out to them, because when they show their vulnerability, when anyone shows their vulnerability, more people are more willing to respond in a way that creates that environment that we want.
Absolutely. Bring your full self to work. I agree with you, is a big ask. And it's definitely easier said than done. Is the workplace
Oh,
for you to bring your amount of self to work? Are other people modeling vulnerability, like you mentioned as well, especially senior leaders too? And when we were talking about this earlier as well, I think is really important of what you brought up around individual psychological safety. So I definitely wanted to kind of ask what your advice is for folks to create really healthy boundaries. We love healthy boundaries and set up psychological safety for themselves.
yeah, and it's hard, right, to say, to especially to your leader or to your peer, to your teammates, hey, like, this is my boundary, this is my box, right? Like, I need you to cross that line. But it's really important, because then it allows them to understand where I'm coming from if I respond in a way that may not be normal Noelle. And I think that's additional ways that you help people to understand and build those parameters. I think it's letting them know, hey, where's my non-negotiables? Or people say, right, the line in the sand. I think that's important in creating that space. If I feel comfortable telling you that, then you're most likely going to tell that to me, and we can make sure that we support one another. We could also make sure that when someone does something in that space, someone does something in that space that doesn't sit well, whether it's a peer or another colleague, that my partner, what I call sometimes accountability partner, can help and step in and be able to be that voice for me sometimes too. I think that's also what's really important about psychological safety. It's not just for yourself, but it's how others support you. And if we built a relationship, you know that I may not say anything this moment, but you know I needed that support, and you can step in. That's also part of creating those boundaries to support one another when you're in a safe environment.
Absolutely. Creating those boundaries is really important. And just from our kind of conversation today, I can tell this is something that you are enthusiastic and really passionate about and are excited to talk about with others too. And it sounds like the organization is really supportive, but I would be remiss if we didn't talk about how diversity, equity, and inclusion steering the ship requires a lot of emotional labor. It requires a lot of emotions. And I'm sure people are coming to you every day and kind of asking questions, and everybody's on their different equity journey. What are some tools you recommend, really practitioners in the space leverage to truly take care of themselves and really not burn out?
Yeah, and to your point, it's hard, right? Because you want to help everyone, you want to answer everyone's question, but after time, like, you have to take time for yourself. And what I tell people is that's not being selfish. That's being smart. Because if I don't take the time to replenish myself, then I can't be the best partner and leader and a person to steer that ship for everyone. So one of the things that I love here at Exos is what part of our Google calendars is focus time. And I was like, what is focus time? What is an ability for me to kind of decompress and understand? And here at Exos, recovery and mindset are two of our parts of our methodology where we slow down and say, hey, let's make sure we align ourselves to how we can be the best teammate for others. And I think that's really important to take that time, whether it's a breathing exercise that we can do in our Exos Fit app here at Exos, or just maybe it's taking some time for gratitude. I think that's such a big part of our DE&I work is gratitude. And we know how important that is. And from a positivity standpoint, what that does when you share it or you receive it. So I think it's taking those moments for yourself to say, hey, I need to reset to be able to be the best person for my team and the best person to support when people have those questions. Because the last thing I want to do is someone ask me a question and then I'm not in a good place and I don't respond very well, right? Because then, to your point, people are in different parts of their journey. So if someone's saying, I want to dive into the pool, right? I think about DE&I work as a pool, and I want to put my foot in and ask some more questions, and I'm not in the right space, then all of a sudden they don't want to swim anymore, right? They don't want to engage. They don't want to learn. So I have to make sure that I'm at my best to support all the teammates here at Exos.
Yeah, what does it say? You cannot pour from an empty cup. So it's really not selfish to take care of yourself, really, again, going back to those healthy boundaries too, and really checking in, having that self-awareness too. So it is sustainable as well. And, you're taking care of others and yourself too. I like the idea of focus time and kind of heads down work, especially with Zoom and everybody's schedule is crazy. It could easily be back-to-back meetings all day, every day. And we always want to make sure that actions are aligned with words, and these non-negotiables are so important. In terms of burnout, are there any other successful strategies you've seen executives and managers really proactively prevent burnout on their teams?
Yeah, and I think the other piece is sometimes it's just asking, right? What is going to get you to be more energized, right? So if it's, hey, you know what? Hey, I want to spend more time. Like for me, it's with my god kids. So making sure that I tell that to my leader and say, hey, I want to make sure that I spend an additional day with them or whatever that is. My leader knows too. So my leader is aware of those boundaries, and we can have that communication. I think that's important, right? I think back to the authentic, bring your authentic self for work. probably 10, 15 years ago, people used to say, leave your problems at the door, right? Like, don't bring your authentic self to work. And now that we're saying that, then we have to respect when someone says, I need just to be able to have 30 minutes to go take a walk, right? Or go spend some time with my dog, or whatever that is. And what I've seen here at Exos is the leaders that do that, they're able to give even more to their teams. And it also brings great conversation with one another, right? Because now they're able to talk about each other's pets or families. And then those are the moments that are really important from a trust standpoint. When you tell me something that's really meaningful and I remember it, and then we talk about it later on, or I bring it up, and oh, how was that paid for that class? Or how was the situation when you were going to vacate? Like, whatever that is, those are just other ways, right? By building psychological safety when you build trust. So, like I said, my leaders here have been super supportive of that work, and I'm just grateful. Like I said, that focus time, it's huge. I always thought I was doing it before, but literally putting it on my calendar, game changer. Let me tell you.
Blocking time off on your calendar, yes, absolutely. I love it, and I appreciate what you said in terms of kind of the dynamics of work changing, kind of bringing yourself to work meetings means having hard conversations, means sharing with your manager and with your team where you at every day is not 100% too, and that building trust theme keeps coming up as well. And I think that's a major change we've seen over the past, especially 2 years too. And kind of some organizations say that they have an open door policy. It's a super trustful environment, but we know historically that especially coming to leaders or coming to people in HR teams, feedback wasn't always something that people were willing to give. What are some methods you use to really build that trust within your organization and encourage folks to give that feedback, whether it's positive, negative, or anything in between to HR and your team?
Yeah, and previously, like I said, at my last role, I was
Yeah,
also a senior HR business
yeah,
partner. So one of the things that I also see here at Exos that I've done before is making sure as an HR business partner, they're part of the work. Like the team knows them, not to say, oh, I'm calling HR for an issue or a complaint. They know them. Like they know Debbie and her team and Abby and all of these folks. And I think that's how you do that. So when someone has a concern, and it's not just saying, I'm calling HR. It's, I know Debbie, I trust her. We've had a great relationship. And I know that what I'm going to share is going to be in confidence, right? Or is going to be met with sound advice, and it's going to be objective advice. And I think that's some of the difference, right? Yes, we have a culture as well. We have an anonymous line like most companies, right? Speak up and, Team Exos. But I think the relationships with the business partner really makes a difference. Like I said, I've been here 90 days and I've already had some of those conversations in my role because, again, as people have gotten to know me and know my style, and, I'm from New York, so I connect with everybody. But I think that's what's important when they know that I'm not just emailing this random, mailbox or whatever. They have a connection to the person, and that team does it really well by not just, getting on Zoom calls with teams. They're out in the sites. They're connecting with the part timer that works at the front desk. They're connecting with the lifeguard. I mean, they're connected with everyone on every level. That like I was like, we have all these sites, and you know all these people, right? Like, but that's what's important. And until the employee and the teammates feel comfortable when they reach out to someone that they have a face and a connection with. So yes, the line is there. We have it, and it's a fantastic resource, but it takes it to the next level when you have that personalized relationship. And I think if more companies, when we look at HR not just as a function, but as who we are, right? Like that's why it's here. It's called people operations. People is first on purpose because I think people need to understand it is a people organization, and that's how you build relationships.
yeah, we've even seen shifts in language to people and culture teams, people teams instead of
Yeah.
as well. And there's always a ton of research out there that says when you create those meaningful connections, especially early on, you are more likely to do better work. You're more likely to stay in an organization, and everybody has a better experience at the organization as well. In
Yeah.
terms of your first 90 days, I think you said at Exos, we are in March 2022. And this year's theme for International Women's Day is breaking the bias, and it's Women's History Month. This is something for gender equity we should be talking about 365 days a year, but definitely want to ask How are you breaking the bias and encouraging gender equity at Exos? What have you seen so far?
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, super excited that again we had International Women's Day. But what I've seen here are, like I said, our employee resource groups and our Women at Exos group has done phenomenal work. So we have what we're calling the Break the Bias weekly series, and it's curated by teammates, right, who have raised their hand and said, I want to tell my story. So, for instance, we had a young lady speak about normalizing living without children, right? Like, because think about as women, that's a
Yeah.
question we get asked all of the time. We had
Yeah.
another young lady talk about living with endometriosis. Like, those are the things where we're bringing the conversation. So we're not just saying we're breaking the bias, and we know we're doing it, but when teammates can show up and tell their stories, I think that changes the conversation. So emotional maturity is coming on later in the month. We also are going to have a panel hosted by our CEO, Sarah Robb O'Hagan, about women at Exos, like the extreme women at Exos, and hearing from some senior leaders as well as field leaders. And I think those are ways that we help people to be in spaces where they can learn from different folks, right? Not everyone's experience is going to be the same if you're in the C-suite or if you're a full-time or a part-timer in a field at a site. And I think that's what's important, to start having these conversations together. So super excited about the work. And just from a company standpoint, our CEO is a woman, and Sarah is phenomenal. And I think what she does is she leads with such empathy and humility, and just a fantastic sense of humanity and how she wants to interact and connect with everyone. So how could I not be inspired, right, by the break the bias theme when our CEO at the helm just shows up in a way that is super authentic. And when you talk to Sarah, she's talking to you, right? And I think that's what's important sometimes. And I felt that in other organizations as well. But when you talk with Sarah, it's different. She's interested. She wants to tell this story, and she wants to not just tell her story, but to understand yours. And then later on, 2 months later, she's remembering it. So I think that's really important in making sure that we have those conversations. And to your point, from an equity standpoint, right? Like, there's still opportunities when it comes to women. We think about the pay gender gaps, and just in other spaces nationally, that we have to make some changes too. And we started to have some of those conversations here at Exos, as we have an upcoming unconscious bias training that we're starting to deep dive into some of those conversations to help people to be aware. Because sometimes it's a knowledge gap that people just don't know. And our job is to help educate, right? Not to chastise, not to judge, but to educate, to help people along that journey.
Absolutely. I love those examples because it sounds like a really holistic strategy of how Exos and leaders are showing up all of year round. And I love the storytelling aspect as well, because I think going to meaningful connection, that is how we kind of learn from one another and deepen our relationships as well with folks. Shifting a little bit in terms of, you mentioned like everybody is on a different journey and education is a big part of it. So not necessarily at Exos or any of the organizations that you have worked at in the past, are there any common mistakes you've seen companies consistently make in their equity strategy, even with the best intentions? Maybe they have already iterated on that strategy. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and to your point, I've been fortunate, whether it was at Best Buy for 14 years and here at Exos. But I've seen companies in the past, and just, having friends in different parts of the industry, where we have companies that focus on diversity, right? And they say, hey, we want to have more women, or we want to have more people of color. And they do that. Fantastic. Check, right? But then when you think about from an inclusion standpoint, then that person may be the only one, right? Or one or two in the room. And it's like, well, I'm here, right? They brought me into the company, but I'm not here into a place where people are inviting me in, right? And I think that's a problem. And then take
Yeah.
it a step further, maybe they get invited in and they're at the table, but then they don't have a voice at the table. And I think that's where you throw in the equity piece, right? Because you can say, hey, we have a diverse workforce. Hey, we include them and invite them to events. But if you still don't allow those people, those teammates, employees, to have a voice and to speak and feel comfortable and feel safe, then that's where the fail is. So I think that's where companies have to be mindful. You can't just say, oh, check, check, because you're not going to get the third one if that is how you set up your plan to be. And I think that's just one of the key things that I've seen, just people, when people fail, I'm just like, no, like, you can't do that. Because what you're going to have is this turn and churn, right?
Yeah.
And people just like a hamster wheel, kind of going through companies. Like I said, I've been very fortunate between Best Buy here at Exos that people have given that voice. And let me be clear, the voice isn't just to have an employee resource group. Because I think sometimes people think, oh, we have that, we're good. There's a voice there. No, but what does employee resource groups do? Are they helping to make impactful change in organizations, whether it's job descriptions and guidebooks and scholarships? That's an employee resource group that has teeth behind the work that they do versus just saying we have groups. And I think that's where sometimes where people fail too. They just put someone there. Oh, we have a leader, but they're not helping to truly move the work forward. And that's again where I've been fortunate here at Exos is that our teams are part of decision making, huge monumental decision making for the organization because our leaders believe in it and they're allowing our employee resource groups to help lead. So those are just two big things for me where I see people drop the ball.
I 100% agree with you. Diversity is really important, getting talent in the door, but also is your environment set up to ensure that they, the careers are developed? Or is it, do people feel included? Otherwise, you're just going to have very high churn rate. People are not going to have great experiences as well. So getting below the surface and also making sure that your environment is set up for that is super important. Having the support of leaders, and we're not fans of box checkers here either. So I love that response. Noelle, is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or underscoring 1 to 2 key takeaways you hope people bring with them?
Yeah, I just want to highlight the fact, as I said it before, with the diversity, equity, inclusion piece, it's ensuring as you create these environments that people have voices in those spaces. So don't just say you've made seats at the table, right? We hear that a lot. Oh, making sure there's enough seats at the table. Give people the voice when they're at that table. I think that's what's really important in the work. And then I think the other piece I highlight when it comes to this work, it's not just passion projects, right? I think sometimes people are like, oh, you should go do DE&I because you're passionate about it. No, it's because it's important and it's how we show up and it's the culture of an organization. And I think that's some of like the misconceptions that people have. It's like, oh, it's a passion project. No. It's who I am. It's who we need to be as organizations in order to move the work forward. So like I said, at Exos, we say greatness is a team sport. And I truly feel that when it comes to the DE&I work here.
I love that. I think that is a great kind of call to action to end on as well. Noelle, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Of course, of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.